Officer Sarah Martinez drove her police car slowly down Pine Street. The cold November wind made people walk faster on the sidewalks. She had been a cop for 8 years in Seattle. She knew this part of the city well. It was full of expensive shops and nice restaurants. Rich people came here to buy things and eat good food, but lately there had been problems. Store owners kept calling the police. They said homeless people were sleeping in their doorways. The homeless people made customers feel scared. The store owners wanted the police to make them go away. Sarah did not like this part of her job. She became a police officer to help people. But sometimes helping one group of people meant hurting another group. The homeless people had nowhere else to go. The cold weather made everything worse. As she drove past a big clothing store, she saw him. An old man was sitting in the doorway. He had long gray hair that looked like it had not been washed in weeks. His clothes were dirty and had holes in them. His shoes were falling apart. Next to him was an old backpack that looked very worn. Sarah parked her car and got out. The man looked up at her when she walked over. His eyes were blue and very calm. Most homeless people looked scared when they saw police. This man did not look scared at all. "Good evening, sir," Sarah said. She tried to sound friendly. "I'm Officer Martinez. I need you to move along from here." The man looked at her for a moment. Then he spoke. His voice was clear and soft. "Good evening, Officer Martinez. I understand you have a job to do, but I have nowhere else to go tonight." Sarah was surprised. The man spoke like he had gone to college. Most homeless people she met spoke differently. They were often confused or angry or very sad. This man seemed very calm and smart. "Sir, the store owner has asked us to keep this area clear. There are shelters downtown where you can sleep tonight. It's going to get very cold." The man shook his head slowly. "I have been to the shelters. They are full, and I do not want to take a bed from someone who needs it more than I do." "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Robert Chen," the man said. He said it clearly, like he was proud of his name. Sarah looked around. Other people were walking by and staring. Some of them looked angry. She knew the store owner would call her boss if she did not do something. "Mr. Chen, I really need you to move. If you don't, I will have to arrest you for trespassing." Robert Chen looked at her with those calm blue eyes. "I understand, Officer Martinez. Do what you need to do." Sarah felt bad. This man was not causing trouble. He was not drunk or using drugs. He was not bothering anyone. But the law was the Yao law, and her boss had told all the officers to be tough about homeless people in this area. "Sir, I'm going to have to place you under arrest. Please stand up and put your hands behind your back." Robert Chen stood up slowly. He was taller than Sarah thought. Even in his dirty clothes, he stood up straight like a soldier. He put his hands behind his back without saying anything. Sarah put the handcuffs on him. They felt cold in the night air. "You have the right to remain silent," she began. She said all the words she had to say when she arrested someone. Robert Chen listened carefully to every word. "Do you understand these rights?" Sarah asked. "Yes, I do," Robert Chen said. "Thank you for explaining them clearly." Again, Sarah was surprised. Most people who got arrested were angry or scared or confused. They yelled or cried or tried to run away. Robert Chen acted like getting arrested was just another thing that happened in life. Sarah picked up his backpack. It was heavier than she thought it would be. "Is this yours?" "Yes." "Please be careful with it. Everything I own is in there." Sarah helped Robert Chen get into the back of her police car. He did not fight or complain. He just sat quietly and looked out the window as they drove to the police station. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said as they drove, "can I call someone for you? A family member or friend?" "No, thank you," Robert Chen said. "There is no one to call." The way he said it made Sarah feel sad. She looked at him in her mirror. He was not looking angry or sorry for himself. He just looked tired. Very, very tired. When they got to the police station, Sarah helped Robert Chen out of the car. Other officers were bringing in other people who had been arrested. Most of them were yelling or crying or causing trouble. Robert Chen walked quietly next to Sarah. Inside the station, Sarah took off his handcuffs. She had to search him and take his things. In his pockets, she found a few dollars and some coins. That was all the money he had. She also found a small piece of paper with a phone number on it. The paper was very old and worn. "Whose number is this?" Sarah asked. Robert Chen looked at the paper. For the first time, his calm face showed some sadness. "That was my wife's number. She died 3 years ago. I keep it to remember her." Sarah felt her heart hurt a little. She gave the paper back to him. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Robert Chen said. Sarah took his fingerprints and his picture. Robert Chen did everything she asked without complaining. When other officers saw how calm he was, they started to notice him too. "First time getting arrested?" one officer asked Robert Chen. "Yes," Robert Chen answered. "Well, you're handling it better than most people do their 10th time," the officer said with a smile. Sarah finished all the paperwork. She looked at Robert Chen sitting quietly on the bench. Something about him was different. She could not figure out what it was, but she knew there was more to his story than what she could see. As she took him to the holding cell, Robert Chen turned to her. "Officer Martinez, thank you for treating me with respect tonight. Not everyone would have done that." Sarah looked into his calm blue eyes. "Everyone deserves respect, Mr. Chen, no matter what their situation is." Robert Chen smiled for the first time that night. It was a sad smile, but it was real. "Your parents raised you well." As Sarah locked the cell door, she could not stop thinking about Robert Chen. There was something about him that made her want to know more. But for now, her shift was just beginning and she had to get back to work. Sergeant Mike Torres had been working at the police station for 15 years. He had seen thousands of people get arrested: drug dealers, thieves, drunk drivers, and homeless people. After so many years, he thought he had seen everything. But Robert Chen was different. Torres was working the front desk when Officer Martinez brought Robert Chen in. Most homeless people who got arrested looked scared or angry. They smelled bad and talked to themselves. Some of them were sick from drugs or alcohol. But Robert Chen was not like that. He walked into the station like he was walking into a library, quiet and respectful. His clothes were dirty and old, but he did not smell like alcohol or drugs. He answered every question clearly. When Torres asked for his full name, Robert said, "Robert James Chen," in a clear voice. "Date of birth?" Torres asked. "March 15th, 1963, Robert answered. Torres looked up from his computer. That would make Robert Chen 60 years old. He looked older because of his long gray hair and worn face. But his eyes were bright and clear. "Address?" Torres asked. "I don't have a permanent address right now," Robert said. This was normal for homeless people. Torres wrote no fixed address on the form. "Next of kin? Someone we can call?" Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There is no one." Torres had heard this before too. Many homeless people had lost touch with their families, or their families had given up on them. "Any medical problems? Are you taking any medicine?" "No medical problems." "No medicine," Robert said. Officer Martinez gave Torres the things she had taken from Robert's pockets: a few dollars, some coins, and the old piece of paper with a phone number. Torres put them in a plastic bag. "What about the backpack?" Torres asked. "It's heavy," Martinez said. "Should I look through it now?" "Yes, bring it here," Torres said. Martinez put the backpack on the desk. When she opened it, Torres was surprised by what he saw. Most homeless people carried bottles, drugs, or junk in their bags. Robert's backpack was very organized. There were 3 books. One was about philosophy by a man named Marcus Aurelius. One was about business and money. The third book was about computer programming. All the books looked old but were in good condition. There was also a small notebook. Martinez opened it and showed it to Torres. The pages were filled with writing. But it was not regular writing. It was numbers and symbols and equations. The writing was very neat and small. "What is this?" Torres asked Robert. Just some things I think about, Robert said. I like to work on math problems. Torres looked at the equations. He had finished high school, but this math looked very hard, like college math, or maybe even harder. Are you a teacher? Torres asked. I used to work with computers, Robert said. There were also some clothes in the backpack. They were clean but old. At the bottom of the bag was a small plastic box. Inside the box was a picture of a woman and a young man in a military uniform. Your family? Torres asked. Robert looked at the picture. His calm face became very sad. My wife Linda and my son David. They both died. Torres felt bad for asking. He put the picture back in the box. I'm sorry. Thank you, Robert said. Next, Torres had to take Robert's fingerprints. He rolled each finger on the ink pad and then pressed them on the card. Robert knew exactly what to do, like he had watched it on TV many times. Have you ever been arrested before? Torres asked. No, never, Robert said. Torres put the fingerprints into the computer system. The computer would check if Robert Chen had ever been arrested anywhere in the United States. Usually homeless people had been arrested many times before. While they waited for the computer, Torres filled out more forms. He had to write down what Robert was wearing and how tall he was. Robert was 6 feet tall but looked thinner than he should be. Torres could tell he had not been eating enough food. The computer made a beeping sound. Torres looked at the screen. He was very surprised by what he saw. No criminal record, Torres said to Martinez. Clean as a whistle. This was very unusual. Most people who lived on the streets had been arrested before. Maybe for small things like drinking in public or sleeping where they should not sleep. But Robert Chen had never been arrested for anything. Torres looked at Robert with new interest. You really have never been in trouble with the police? Never, Robert said. I have always tried to follow the law. Then how did you end up on the streets? Torres asked. Robert was quiet for a moment. Sometimes life gives you more sadness than you can carry. Some people turn to drugs or alcohol. I chose a different path. Torres did not understand what Robert meant, but something about the way he said it made Torres feel sad. Officer Johnson walked over to the desk. He was older than Torres and had been a cop for 20 years. What do we have here? Homeless man arrested for trespassing, Torres said. But he's different from the usual ones. Johnson looked at Robert. How so? Clean record. Speaks like he went to college. Look at this. Torres showed Johnson the notebook with all the math. Johnson looked at the equations. What is this stuff? I don't know, Torres said. But it looks complicated. Robert sat quietly while the officers talked about him. He did not seem upset that they were looking at his things and talking about him. He just waited patiently. Mr. Chen, Johnson said, where did you learn to do this math? I studied engineering in college, Robert said. A long time ago. Which college? Johnson asked. University of Washington, Robert said. Torres and Johnson looked at each other. The University of Washington was a very good school. It was expensive too. How did someone who went there end up sleeping in doorways? What kind of engineering? Torres asked. Computer engineering, Robert said. I worked on software. Like computer programs? Johnson asked. Yes. Torres was getting more and more curious about Robert Chen. Everything about him was different from other homeless people. He was smart and polite and clean. His record was completely clean. He had gone to a good college. Mr. Chen, can I ask you something personal? Torres said. Of course. How long have you been homeless? Robert thought for a moment. About 2 years. And before that, I had a house, a job, a normal life. What happened to change that? Robert looked at the picture of his wife and son again. I lost the 2 most important people in my life. After that, nothing else seemed to matter. Torres felt very sad for Robert. He had seen many people whose lives had been destroyed by tragedy, but most of them turned to drugs or alcohol. Robert seemed to have just given up on having a normal life. Do you have any money saved anywhere? Any bank accounts? Torres asked. I have a small bank account, Robert said. Enough to buy food when I need it. Why don't you rent an apartment? Even a small one? Robert was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, I don't feel like I deserve to live comfortably when my family is gone. Torres did not know what to say to that. He finished filling out all the forms and got ready to take Robert to the holding cell. Mr. Chen, Torres said, you seem like a good man who has had some bad luck. Maybe you should think about getting some help. There are people who can help you get back on your feet. Thank you for your kindness, Sergeant Torres, Robert said. But I am where I need to be right now. As Torres walked Robert to the holding cell, he could not stop thinking about him. There was definitely more to Robert Chen's story. Torres had a feeling that this quiet, polite, homeless man was hiding something big. The holding cell was small and cold. It had gray walls and a metal bench along one side. There was a toilet in the corner and a small sink. The only light came from a bright bulb on the ceiling that never turned off. When Sergeant Torres opened the cell door, Robert Chen walked in quietly. There were already 3 other men in the cell. They all looked up when Robert came in. The first man was young, maybe 25 years old. His name was Jake, and he had been arrested for stealing from a store. He looked scared and kept shaking his hands. The second man was older and bigger. His name was Mike, and he was there for getting into a fight at a bar. He looked angry and kept walking back and forth. The third man was middle-aged and quiet. His name was Carlos, and he had been driving without a license. He just sat in the corner and looked sad. When the 3 men saw Robert, they were not happy. Homeless people usually smelled bad and acted strange. The men did not want to share their small space with someone like that. Great, another crazy homeless guy, Mike said in a loud voice, just what we needed. Robert did not say anything. He sat down on the bench near the door and closed his eyes. He looked very tired. Jake moved to the other end of the bench. He did not want to sit near Robert. Man, when is my lawyer going to get here? Jake said to no one. Lawyers cost money, Mike said. Do you have money? My mom is going to pay for it, Jake said. You're lucky you have a mom who cares, Carlos said quietly. Robert opened his eyes and looked at Carlos. You sound sad, friend. What happened to you? Carlos was surprised that Robert was talking to him. Most homeless people he had met either talked to themselves or did not talk at all. I got caught driving without a license, Carlos said. I lost my license last year because I could not pay some tickets. But I have to drive to get to work. My family needs the money. That's a hard situation, Robert said. You were trying to do the right thing for your family. Yeah, but now I might lose my job, Carlos said. If I can't drive, I can't work. If I can't work, my kids don't eat. Robert nodded. Sometimes life puts us in impossible situations. We have to choose between following the law and taking care of our families. Mike stopped walking and looked at Robert. What do you know about it, old man? You don't have a job or a family to worry about. Robert looked at Mike with his calm blue eyes. You're right. I don't have those worries anymore. But I used to. I remember what it felt like to be responsible for other people. What happened to your family? Jake asked. He was starting to get curious about Robert. Robert was quiet for a moment. They died. My wife was killed in a car accident. My son died in the war in Afghanistan. The cell became very quiet. All 3 men stopped what they were doing and looked at Robert. I'm sorry, man, Mike said. His angry voice became softer. That's really hard. Thank you, Robert said. It was hard. It still is hard. But life goes on, even when we don't want it to. A guard brought dinner to the cell. It was not very good food. Just a sandwich, some chips, and a cup of water. Each man got 1 tray. Robert looked at his food, and then at Jake. The young man was very thin and looked hungry. Robert walked over to Jake and held out his tray. Here, you look like you need this more than I do, Robert said. I can't take your food, Jake said. I'm not very hungry tonight, Robert said. Please take it. Jake took the tray. Thank you, I haven't eaten since yesterday. Why not? Carlos asked. I spent my last money on drugs, Jake said. He looked ashamed. I've been trying to quit, but it's really hard. Addiction is a disease, Robert said. It's not a choice you made to be bad. It's something that happened to you. My mom says I'm just weak, Jake said. Your mom is wrong, Robert said. Being addicted doesn't make you weak. It makes you sick. And sick people need help, not blame. Jake started to cry a little. I don't know how to get help. I don't have insurance or money for treatment. There are free programs, Robert said. When you get out of here, I can tell you where to find them. Mike sat down next to Robert. How do you know so much about this stuff? I've spent 2 years living on the streets, Robert said. I've met a lot of people with different problems. Drug addiction, mental illness, job loss, family problems. You learn a lot when you listen to people's stories. Why are you on the streets? Mike asked. You don't seem like the type. Robert looked at the picture of his wife and son that the guard had let him keep. After my family died, I didn't know how to live anymore. I had a big house and a good job, but it all felt empty. So I gave it all up and started living differently. You chose to be homeless? Carlos asked. In a way, yes, Robert said. I thought if I lived with less, I would feel less pain. I thought if I suffered, it would help me understand why my family had to suffer. Did it work? Jake asked. Robert smiled sadly. Not really. Pain is pain, no matter where you sleep at night. But I did learn something important. What's that? Mike asked. I learned that everyone is fighting a hard battle. The store owner who called the police on me tonight probably has his own problems. Officer Martinez, who arrested me, was just doing her job. But I could see she felt bad about it. Sergeant Torres was kind to me, even though he didn't have to be. And you 3 men are all here for different reasons, but you're all trying to do your best in difficult situations. The men sat quietly and thought about what Robert had said. Robert, Carlos said, what kind of work did you do before? I worked with computers, Robert said. I helped create software programs. Like what kind of programs? Jake asked. Programs that helped businesses keep track of their money and their customers, Robert said. That sounds like a good job, Mike said. It was, Robert said. I made good money. I had a nice life. Do you ever think about going back to that kind of work? Carlos asked. Robert shook his head. That life belonged to a different person. When my family died, that person died too. Now I'm just Robert, a man trying to figure out how to live with a broken heart. As the night went on, the 4 men talked more. Robert helped Jake write a letter to his mother. He told Jake what to say to show his mother that he was serious about getting clean from drugs. Robert also talked to Carlos about free legal help that might help him get his driver's license back. Mike was the biggest surprise. He seemed angry and mean at first, but Robert learned that Mike had lost his job 3 months ago. He had been drinking too much because he was worried about paying his bills. The fight at the bar happened because someone made fun of him for being unemployed. I've been looking for work every day, Mike told Robert. But no one wants to hire someone my age. They all want young people who work for less money. That's not fair, Robert said. Experience should count for something. Tell that to the bosses, Mike said. Robert thought for a moment. What kind of work do you do? I'm an electrician, Mike said. A good one too, 20 years of experience. Have you thought about starting your own business? Robert asked. I don't have money to start a business, Mike said. You don't need much money to start, Robert said. Just tools and a truck, and you already have experience. People always need electricians. Robert spent the next hour explaining to Mike how to start a small business. He told him about licenses and insurance and how to find customers. Mike listened carefully and asked good questions. How do you know all this business stuff? Mike asked. I learned it when I started my own company, Robert said. You had your own company? Jake asked. Yes. I started it in my garage and grew it into a big business, Robert said. What happened to it? Carlos asked. I sold it, Robert said. After my family died, I didn't want to run a business anymore. Officer Martinez walked by the cell during her rounds. She could hear the men talking quietly. Most nights, the holding cell was full of yelling and fighting. But tonight the men were having calm conversations. She wondered what had made the difference. When she looked through the small window in the door, she saw Robert talking to the other men. They were all listening to him carefully. It looked like he was teaching them something. Martinez had been thinking about Robert Chen all night. Something about him bothered her, but she could not figure out what it was. He seemed too smart and too calm to be a regular homeless person. She decided that when her shift was over, she would try to learn more about him. As the night got late, the men got ready to try to sleep. The bench was hard and the cell was cold, but they were tired. "Robert," Jake said, "thank you for sharing your food and for helping me with the letter." "You're welcome," Robert said. "I hope things get better for you." "Robert," Mike said, "thanks for the business advice. Maybe I will try to start my own company." "I think you should," Robert said. "You have the skills and the experience. You just need to believe in yourself." "Robert," Carlos said, "you're a good man. I hope you find some peace." "Thank you, Carlos," Robert said. "I hope you get your license back and keep your job." The men lay down on the hard bench and tried to sleep. But Robert stayed awake, looking at the ceiling and thinking about his wife and son. He thought about the choices he had made and the life he had left behind. Outside the cell, Officer Martinez continued her rounds, but she kept thinking about the quiet homeless man who spoke like a professor and helped other people even when he had nothing for himself. Officer Sarah Martinez could not sleep when she got home from her shift. She kept thinking about Robert Chen. Something about him did not make sense. He was too polite, too smart, and too calm to be a typical homeless person. Most homeless people she arrested were struggling with mental illness or drug addiction. They were often confused or angry or very sad. But Robert Chen seemed completely clear in his mind. He spoke like someone who had gone to college. He knew about business and math and computers. Sarah had been a police officer for 8 years. She had learned to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. And everything about Robert Chen felt wrong. Not wrong like he was dangerous or lying. Wrong like there was a big piece of his story missing. The next morning, Sarah came to work. Early, she wanted to do some research before Robert Chen was released from jail. She sat down at her computer and opened the police database. First, she looked up Robert Chen's arrest record again. The computer showed exactly what Sergeant Torres had found the night before. No criminal history anywhere in the United States. For a 60-year-old man who had been homeless for 2 years, this was very unusual. Next, Sarah decided to search for Robert Chen on the internet. She typed Robert Chen Seattle into the search engine. Hundreds of results came up. There were many people named Robert Chen in Seattle. She added computer engineer to the search. The first result made Sarah's eyes grow wide. It was a news article from 15 years ago. The headline said, "Local tech entrepreneur sells company for $50 million. Sarah clicked on the article and read it carefully. The article was about a man named Robert James Chen who had started a software company called Dataflow Systems. He had started the company in his garage with just $5,000. Over 10 years, he had grown it into a business with over 200 employees. The article said that Chen had sold Dataflow Systems to a large technology company for $50 million. It was one of the biggest business deals in Seattle that year. Sarah looked at the picture in the article. It showed a man in an expensive suit standing in front of a big office building. He looked much younger and was clean-shaven, but Sarah could see it was the same person. The same blue eyes, the same face. It was definitely Robert Chen, but the man in the picture looked nothing like the homeless man she had arrested. The Robert Chen in the article was successful and rich. He had short, neat hair and was smiling. He looked confident and happy. Sarah kept reading. The article said that Robert Chen had graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in computer engineering. It said he was married to a woman named Linda and had a son named David, who was in the Army. Sarah felt her heart beating faster. She searched for more articles about Robert Chen. She found several more stories about his business success. One article called him one of Seattle's most promising young entrepreneurs. But then the articles stopped. The last article about Robert Chen was from 10 years ago. After that, there was nothing. It was like he had disappeared from public life. Sarah searched for Robert Chen data flow systems and found a few more recent articles. These articles were about the company he had sold, but they did not mention Robert Chen at all. It was like he had been forgotten. Sarah decided to search for information about Robert's family. She typed Linda Chen Seattle obituary into the search engine. She found what she was looking for. An obituary from 3 years ago. Linda Marie Chen had died in a car accident on Interstate 5. The obituary said she was survived by her husband, Robert, and her son David, who was serving in the army in Afghanistan. Sarah's hands were shaking as she searched for David Chen. She found his obituary too. David Chen had been killed by a roadside bomb in Afghanistan 2.5 years ago. He was only 28 years old. Now Sarah understood. Robert Chen had lost his wife and his only child within 6 months of each other. No wonder he had given up on his old life. But Sarah still had questions. If Robert Chen had sold his company for $50 million, where was all that money at? Even if he had spent a lot of it, he should still have enough to live comfortably. Why was he sleeping in doorways? Sarah searched for more information about Robert's finances. She found an article from 2 years ago in a small local newspaper. The headline said, "Local millionaire donates fortune to charity." The article was short, but it explained everything. After his son died, Robert Chen had given away most of his money. He had donated $15 million to a charity that helped families of soldiers killed in war. He had given $10 million to an organization that helped victims of car accidents. He had donated another $10 million to homeless shelters and food banks. The article said that Robert Chen had kept only a small amount of money for himself. When a reporter asked him why he had given away so much, he said, "Money cannot bring back the people you love, but maybe it can help other people who are suffering." Sarah sat back in her chair and stared at the computer screen. Robert Chen was not just a homeless man. He was a millionaire who had chosen to give up his wealth and live on the streets. But why? Why would someone choose to be homeless when they had enough money to live anywhere they wanted? Sarah thought about what Robert had said the night before. He had told Sergeant Torres that he did not feel like he deserved to live comfortably when his family was gone. Maybe giving away his money and living on the streets was his way of punishing himself. Or maybe it was his way of trying to understand suffering. Maybe he thought that if he lived like the poorest people in society, he would learn something about life that he could not learn as a rich man. Sarah looked at the clock. It was almost time for Robert Chen to be released from jail. She had to decide what to do with the information she had discovered. Should she tell Sergeant Torres what she had learned? Should she tell her captain? Should she talk to Robert Chen directly? Sarah thought about the law. Robert Chen had still committed trespassing, even if he was a millionaire. The law was the same for rich people and poor people. But Sarah also thought about justice. Was it just to treat someone like a criminal when they were really just a person dealing with terrible grief? Sarah decided to talk to Robert Chen before he was released. She wanted to hear his side of the story. She wanted to understand why a man who could afford to live anywhere in the world was choosing to sleep in doorways. Sarah walked down to the holding cells. Robert Chen was sitting on the bench reading one of his books. The other 3 men were, "Still sleeping, Mr. Chen?" Sarah said quietly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Robert looked up from his book. "Of course, Officer Martinez." Sarah unlocked the cell door and asked Robert to step outside. She led him to a small interview room where they could talk privately. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions." Sarah said, "I understand." Robert said. Sarah looked at Robert carefully. Even though she knew who he really was, he still looked like a homeless man. His clothes were dirty and his hair was messy. But his eyes were the same calm, intelligent eyes she had seen in the newspaper articles. "Mr. Chen, I did some research about you this morning," Sarah said. Robert's face did not change. "I see. I found articles about your company, Data Flow Systems. I found articles about the money you donated to charity. I found the obituaries for your wife and son." Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What would you like to know?" "I want to know why," Sarah said. "Why would someone who has Enough money to live anywhere, choose to live on the streets? Robert looked down at his hands. That's a difficult question to answer, Officer Martinez. Try, Sarah said. Robert was quiet for a long time. Sarah could see that he was thinking carefully about what to say. When my wife and son died, Robert said finally, I felt like my life was over. Everything I had worked for, everything I cared about was gone. The big house felt empty. The expensive car seemed pointless. The money in my bank account felt like it was covered in blood. So you gave it away? Sarah said. Most of it, Robert said. I kept enough to live on, but I didn't want to live the same kind of life anymore. I wanted to live simply. I wanted to suffer, because suffering felt more honest than pretending to be happy. But why live on the streets? Sarah asked. You could live simply in an apartment or a small house. Robert looked up at Sarah. Because on the streets I meet people who are really suffering. People who have lost everything just like I have. When I talk to someone like Jake who is struggling with drug addiction, I understand his pain. When I meet someone like Carlos, who is working hard but still can't make ends meet, I understand his fear. I could never understand these things when I was rich. Sarah thought about this. But don't you think you could help more people if you had kept your money? You could start programs to help homeless people or drug addicts. Maybe, Robert said. But I don't think I could help anyone until I understood what it felt like to be helpless myself. Money gives you power, but it also separates you from people who don't have power. I needed to give up that separation. Sarah was beginning to understand. Robert Chen was not just punishing himself. He was trying to learn something. He was trying to become a different kind of person. Do you ever regret giving away the money? Sarah asked. Robert smiled sadly. Sometimes I think about how much easier my life would be if I had kept it. Sarah Martinez sat across from Robert Chen in the small interview room. The morning light came through a tiny window near the ceiling. She had learned so much about him in the past hour, but she still had more questions. Mr. Chen, Sarah said, I need to understand something. You say you chose to live on the streets to learn about suffering, but you're still breaking the law. You are trespassing on private property. The store owner has the right to keep his doorway clear. Robert nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, Officer Martinez. I was breaking the law. I accept the consequences of that. But you could avoid breaking the law, Sarah said. You have money in your bank account. You could rent an apartment, you could sleep in shelters, you could find legal places to stay. I could, Robert agreed, but that would defeat the purpose of what I'm trying to learn. Sarah was confused. I don't understand. Robert leaned back in his chair. Officer Martinez, when you have money and options, you never really understand what it's like to be powerless. Real homeless people don't have choices. They sleep in doorways not because they want to, but because they have nowhere else to go. If I kept my safety net of money and options, I would just be playing at being homeless. I would never really understand. So you put yourself in the same impossible situation as people who have no choice, Sarah said. Exactly, Robert said. When I sleep in a doorway, I face the same risks as everyone else who has to sleep there. I get moved along by police. I get yelled at by store owners. I get cold and wet and hungry. I experience the same lack of dignity that real homeless people experience every day. Sarah thought about this. But you're not really the same as other homeless people. You chose this life. They didn't. That's true, Robert said. And that makes me lucky, even in my homelessness. I know that my suffering has a purpose. Most homeless people don't have that comfort. Their suffering just feels random and unfair. Sarah looked at Robert carefully. Do you think your suffering brings your family back? Do you think it honors their memory? Robert was quiet for a long time. Sarah could see pain in his eyes. No, he said finally. My suffering doesn't bring them back. And I don't know if they would want me to live this way. Linda always wanted me to be happy. David always said I worked too hard and should enjoy life more. Then why do you keep doing it? Sarah asked. Robert looked out the small window. Because I don't know how else to live. My old life felt fake after they died. Everything I used to care about seemed stupid and empty. At least this life feels real, even if it's hard. Sarah felt sorry for Robert. She could see that he was a good man who was lost in his grief. Mr. Chen, have you ever talked to someone about how you feel? A counselor or a therapist? No, Robert said. I don't think talking would help. Some kinds of pain can't be fixed with words. Maybe not fixed, Sarah said, but maybe understood better. Maybe you could learn healthier ways to deal with your grief. Robert looked at Sarah with interest. You sound like you care about what happens to me, Officer Martinez. Why? Sarah thought about the question. Because I became a police officer to help people, and you seem like someone who could use help, even if you don't want it. I appreciate that, Robert said. Not many people would care about a homeless man they arrested. You're not just a homeless man, Sarah said. You're a person who has been through terrible loss. You're also a person who has tried to help others, even when you have very little yourself. Robert looked surprised. How do you know that? I watched you last night in the holding cell, Sarah said. You shared your food with Jake. You helped him write a letter to his mother. You gave business advice to Mike. You were kind to Carlos. You took care of other people even when you were in jail yourself. Robert looked embarrassed. That was nothing special. Those men needed help. It was special, Sarah said. Most people think only about themselves when they're in trouble. You thought about other people. Robert was quiet. Sarah could see that he was not used to people saying nice things about him. Mr. Chen, Sarah said, can I ask you something else? Of course. Do you ever help other homeless people when you're on the streets? Robert nodded. When I can. Sometimes I share food or money. Sometimes I just listen to their stories. Many homeless people feel invisible. They feel like nobody cares if they live or die. Sometimes just having someone listen to you can make you feel human again. How do other homeless people react when they find out you used to be rich? Sarah asked. Robert smiled a little. Most of them don't believe me at first. They think I'm crazy or lying. But when they realize it's true, they usually ask me for money. Do you give them money? Sometimes, Robert said, but not very much. I've learned that giving someone a lot of money all at once usually doesn't help them. It just creates new problems. It's better to help in small ways. Buy someone a meal. Help them find a place to sleep. Connect them with services that can really help. Sarah was impressed by Robert's wisdom. Even though he was choosing to live in poverty, he understood how to help people better than many rich people did. Mr. Chen, Sarah said, what do you think should happen to you today? You did break the law. Robert thought for a moment. I should face the same consequences as anyone else who was arrested for trespassing. The law should be the same for everyone, rich or poor. But you're not really poor, Sarah said. In every way that matters, I am poor, Robert said. I have no home. I have no job. I have no family. I have very little money. The fact that I chose this life doesn't make me less poor. It just makes me differently poor. Sarah realized that Robert was right. He was living the same life as any other homeless person, even if he had chosen it. Mr. Chen, Sarah said, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what to do with what I've learned about you. Part of me thinks you should be treated just like any other person arrested for trespassing. Part of me thinks your situation is special and deserves special consideration. What does your heart tell you? Robert asked. Sarah was surprised by the question. My heart tells me that you're a good person who has been hurt very badly. My heart tells me that arresting you doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the store owner, because you'll probably just sleep in another doorway tonight. It doesn't help you because jail doesn't solve your grief. It doesn't help society because you're not dangerous. And what does your training tell you? Robert asked. My training tells me that laws exist for good reasons, Sarah said. If I let everyone go, who has a sad story, then laws would become meaningless. People have to follow rules even when the rules are hard. Robert nodded. That's a difficult balance. Justice and mercy don't always point in the same direction. Sarah looked at Robert with admiration. even while talking about his own arrest. He was trying to help her think through a difficult problem. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said, "what would you do if you were me?" Robert thought carefully. "I would follow the law, but I would also try to help the person I arrested. Maybe there's a way to do both." "What do you mean?" "Maybe my punishment could be something that actually helps people," Robert said. "Instead of just sitting in jail or paying a fine, maybe I could do community service. Maybe I could work at a homeless shelter or a food bank. That way, justice is served, but something good comes out of it too." Sarah smiled. "That's a very wise idea. I've had a lot of time to think about justice and punishment," Robert said. "When you lose everything, you start to see things differently." Sarah made a decision. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to talk to my captain about your case. I'm going to tell him what I've learned about you. I'm going to suggest that you be offered community service instead of jail time or a fine." "Thank you," Robert said. "That's very kind of you. But I have one condition," Sarah said. "What's that?" "I want you to think about getting some counseling. I know you don't think it will help, but I think you owe it to yourself to try. And maybe you owe it to your wife and son's memory to try to find a way to be happy again." Robert was quiet for a long time. Sarah could see that he was really thinking about what she had said. "Officer Martinez," Robert said finally, "you have shown me more kindness and respect than I have received in a long time. If you think counseling might help, I will consider it." "Thank you," Sarah said. "That's all I ask." Sarah stood up to leave. "Mr. Chen, whatever happens next, I want you to know that meeting you has changed how I think about homeless people. You've taught me that everyone has a story, and every story deserves to be heard." "You've taught me something too," Robert said. "What's that?" "You've reminded me that there are still good people in the world. People who care about strangers. People who try to do the right thing even when it's difficult. Maybe that's a reason to keep living even when life is hard." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Mr. Chen, your wife and son must have been very proud of you. I think they would want you to find a way to be happy again." Robert looked at the picture of his family that he still carried. "Maybe you're right, Officer Martinez. Maybe it's time for me to start thinking about that." After talking with Robert Chen, Officer Sarah Martinez walked back to her desk. Her mind was full of thoughts and feelings. She had never been in a situation like this before. In 8 years as a police officer, she had arrested hundreds of people. But she had never arrested someone whose story had affected her so deeply. Sarah sat down at her desk and stared at her computer screen. She needed to write a report about Robert's arrest. But how could she write a normal report about such an unusual situation? If she wrote a standard report, she would just say that she arrested a homeless man for trespassing. She would not mention that he used to be a millionaire. She would not mention that he had given away his fortune to help other people. She would not mention that he was choosing to live on the streets as a way to deal with his grief. But if she told the whole truth in her report, what would happen? Would her captain believe her? Would other officers think she was making excuses for a criminal? Would Robert get in more trouble because of his unusual story? Sarah decided to talk to Sergeant Torres first. He had been working with Robert during the booking process. He had seen how different Robert was from other homeless people. Maybe he would understand Sarah's dilemma. Sarah found Torres finishing his paperwork from the night shift. "Sergeant, can I talk to you about Robert Chen?" Torres looked up from his desk. "The homeless guy with the math notebook, what about him?" "I did some research on him this morning," Sarah said. "I found some very interesting information." Torres leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." Sarah told Torres everything she had learned. She showed him the newspaper articles about Robert's company. She showed him the articles about his wife and son's deaths. She showed him the article about him giving away his fortune. Torres read the articles carefully. His eyes got wider as he read. "This is incredible," he said. "This guy used to be worth $50 million? "Yes," Sarah said. "And he gave most of it away after his family died." Torres looked at the pictures of Robert in the business articles. Then he thought about the quiet, polite man he had processed the night before. "This explains a lot," he said. "I knew there was something different about him." What should we do? Sarah asked. Torres thought for a moment. Technically, he still committed a crime. Being rich or being sad doesn't change that. I know, Sarah said. But don't you think his situation is special? Maybe, Torres said. But we have to be careful. If we start giving special treatment to people because of their backgrounds, where does it end? What about the next homeless person who has a sad story but no money? Sarah had not thought about this. Torres was right. If they treated Robert differently, because he used to be rich, that would not be fair to other homeless people who had sad stories but no money. But this isn't just about money, Sarah said. This is about a man who is clearly suffering from grief and trauma. Maybe he needs help more than punishment. Maybe, Torres said. But that's not our decision to make. We're police officers, not social workers or therapists. Sarah felt frustrated. So we should just treat him like any other criminal? We should treat him like any other person who broke the law, Torres said. But that doesn't mean we can't try to help him too. Torres was right, but Sarah still felt confused. She believed in following the law, but she also believed in showing compassion to people who were suffering. What do you think I should tell Captain Williams? Sarah asked. Tell him the truth, Torres said. Tell him about the arrest. But also, tell him what you learned about Robert's background. Let the captain decide what to do. Sarah nodded. That seemed like the right approach. She would present all the facts and let her boss make the decision. Captain Williams was a fair man who had been a police officer for 25 years. He had seen every kind of situation imaginable. If anyone could figure out the right thing to do, it would be him. Sarah walked to Captain Williams' office and knocked on the door. Captain, do you have a few minutes? I need to talk to you about an arrest I made last night. Come in, Martinez, Captain Williams said. He was a big man, with gray hair and kind eyes. What's on your mind? Sarah sat down and told Captain Williams the whole story. She told him about arresting Robert for trespassing. She told him about Robert's behavior in jail and how he had helped the other prisoners. She told him about her research and what she had discovered about Robert's past. Captain Williams listened carefully without interrupting. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long time. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Captain Williams said finally. You arrested a homeless man for trespassing, but this homeless man used to be a millionaire who gave away his fortune after his family died. And now he's choosing to live on the streets as a way to deal with his grief. That's right, Sarah said. And you think we should treat him differently because of his background? Sarah hesitated. I think we should consider his mental state. He's clearly suffering from depression and trauma. Maybe he needs professional help more than jail time. Captain Williams nodded. That's a fair point. But Martinez, we get people with mental health issues all the time. We can't send everyone to therapy instead of jail just because they have problems. I know, Sarah said. But this case feels different. Different how? Sarah struggled to explain. Captain, this man isn't dangerous. He isn't causing real harm to anyone. He was just sleeping in a doorway because he had nowhere else to go. Yes, it was technically trespassing, but he wasn't hurting anyone. The store owner disagrees, Captain Williams said. He says homeless people are bad for business, that's why he called us. But is that a good enough reason to criminalize homelessness? Sarah asked. Captain Williams looked at Sarah with interest. That's a bigger question than just this one case. Martinez, that's a question about social policy and how society should treat its most vulnerable people. Maybe, Sarah said. But it starts with how we treat individual people like Robert Chen. Captain Williams stood up and walked to his window. He looked out at the city and thought about what Sarah had said. Martinez, he said finally. What do you think we should do with Mr. Chen? I think we should offer him community service instead of jail time, Sarah said. He could work at a homeless shelter or a food bank. That way justice is served, but he also gets to help other people. And I think we should connect him with mental health services. Captain Williams turned around. Those are reasonable suggestions, but I have concerns. What concerns? First, if word gets out that we gave special treatment to a millionaire, even a former millionaire, people will be angry. They'll think we have different rules for rich people and poor people. Sarah had not thought about this. But he's not rich anymore. He's just as homeless as anyone else. But he chose to be homeless, Captain Williams said. That's different from people who have no choice. Is it? Sarah asked. He's still sleeping in doorways. He's still cold and hungry. He's still dealing with the same daily struggles as any other homeless person. Captain Williams nodded. That's true, but perception matters in police work. We have to think about how our actions will be seen by the public. What's your second concern? Sarah asked. My second concern is that we might be making excuses for criminal behavior, Captain Williams said. If we don't enforce trespassing laws, property owners will be upset. They have rights too. Sarah felt frustrated again. Every angle of this situation seemed complicated. There were no easy answers. Captain, Sarah said, what if we don't make any special exceptions for Robert? What if we just treat him exactly like we would treat any other homeless person arrested for trespassing? What do you mean? I mean, what do we normally do with first-time trespassing offenders who aren't dangerous? We usually give them time served and community service, right? Captain Williams thought about this. Usually, yes, especially if they can't afford to pay a fine. Then that's what we should do with Robert, Sarah said. Not because he used to be rich, but because that's our standard procedure for cases like this. Captain Williams smiled. That's good thinking, Martinez. It's fair and it follows our normal protocols. And as for connecting him with mental health services, Sarah continued, we do that for lots of people we arrest, especially people who seem to be struggling with depression or trauma. True, Captain Williams said. We work with several organizations that provide free counseling and support services. Sarah felt relieved. By treating Robert exactly like they would treat any other homeless person in his situation, they could be fair without making special exceptions. There's one more thing, Sarah said. I'd like permission to follow up with Robert after he's released. Not officially, but just to check on him. Maybe help him connect with services if he wants them. Captain Williams considered this. That's above and beyond your duties, Martinez. Why do you want to do that? Sarah thought about the question. Because I think he's a good person who needs help, and because I think there's more I can learn from him about how to do my job better. What do you mean? Captain, Robert has been living on the streets for 2 years. He understands homelessness in a way that most people never will. He could teach us things about how to better serve the homeless community. Captain Williams was intrigued. Like what? Like how to tell the difference between someone who is dangerous and someone who is just desperate. 3 days after Robert Chen was released from jail, a reporter named Jessica Kim got a phone call that would change everything. The caller said he had information about an unusual arrest in downtown Seattle. You arrested a homeless guy a few nights ago, the caller said. But this homeless guy used to be rich, really rich. Jessica had been a reporter for the Seattle Times for 10 years. She had heard many strange stories, but this one sounded interesting. Can you tell me more? His name is Robert Chen. He used to own a big tech company, sold it for $50 million. Then his family died and he gave all his money away. Now he lives on the streets. Jessica was skeptical. People called newspapers all the time with crazy stories that turned out to be false, but she decided to check it out anyway. Jessica went to the police station and asked about Robert Chen's arrest. The desk officer told her it was just a simple trespassing case, nothing unusual. But Jessica had learned to dig deeper when things seemed too simple. She filed a public records request for the arrest report. Then she went to the courthouse to look up information about Robert's court case. That's when she found something interesting. Instead of getting jail time or paying a fine, Robert Chen had been sentenced to 40 hours of community service. He was assigned to work at the downtown emergency shelter. This was unusual for a trespassing case, but not unheard of. Jessica decided to investigate Robert's background. She found the same newspaper articles that Officer Martinez had found. She found the obituaries for Robert's wife and son. She found the article about him donating his fortune to charity. But Jessica also found something that Officer Martinez had missed. She found the address where Robert used to live. It was a mansion in an expensive neighborhood called Medina. The house had been sold 2 years ago for $8 million. That was much less than it was worth. Jessica drove to the neighborhood and talked to Robert's former neighbors. They remembered him as a quiet, friendly man who loved his family. They said he had become very sad after his wife died. After his son died too, they never saw him again. "We always wondered what happened to him," one neighbor said. "He just disappeared. Someone said he sold the house and moved away. We never knew where he went." Jessica realized she had a real story, a millionaire who had given up everything and chosen to live as a homeless person. This was the kind of human interest story that people would want to read. But Jessica was a good reporter. She knew she needed to talk to Robert Chen himself before she could write the story. She went to the downtown emergency shelter where Robert was doing his community service. She found Robert in the kitchen, washing dishes and preparing food. He was working alongside other volunteers and no one seemed to know who he really was. He looked like any other homeless person doing community service. "Mr. Chen," Jessica said, "my name is Jessica Kim. I'm a reporter with the Seattle Times. I'd like to talk to you about your story." Robert looked surprised. "My story? About your company, your family, and your decision to live on the streets," Jessica said. Robert was quiet for a moment. "How did you find out about that?" "I'm a reporter," Jessica said. "It's my job to find out about interesting stories, and your story is very interesting." Robert finished washing the dish he was holding. "I don't know if I want to talk to a reporter." "Why not?" Jessica asked. "Because I'm not trying to be famous," Robert said. "I'm just trying to live my life quietly." Jessica understood his concern. "Mr. Chen, I think your story could help people understand homelessness better. It could change how people think about homeless individuals." Robert thought about this. "How?" "Most people think homeless people are lazy or crazy or drug addicts," Jessica said. "Your story shows that anyone can become homeless. Your story shows that homeless people are complex human beings with real reasons for their situations." Robert was interested in this idea. He had spent 2 years living with homeless people. He knew that most of them had complicated stories that people didn't understand. "If I talk to you," Robert said, "will you promise to be respectful? Will you promise not to make fun of homeless people or make them seem like they're less than human?" "I promise," Jessica said. "I want to tell your story in a way that honors your experience and the experiences of other homeless people." Robert agreed to be interviewed. They sat in a quiet corner of the shelter, and Robert told Jessica his whole story. He talked about building his company and becoming successful. He talked about losing his wife and son. He talked about giving away his money and choosing to live on the streets. "Why did you choose homelessness?" Jessica asked. "You could have dealt with your grief in other ways." "I tried other ways," Robert said. "After Linda died, I went to counseling. I took medication for depression. I tried to keep working. But nothing felt real. Everything felt fake and empty. I thought maybe if I experienced real suffering, I would understand life better." "Did it work?" Robert thought carefully. "In some ways, yes. I learned things about human nature that I never would have learned as a rich man. I learned that people are stronger than I thought. I learned that kindness exists even in the hardest circumstances. I learned that having money doesn't protect you from the most important kinds of pain." "Do you regret your decision?" "Sometimes," Robert said honestly. "Sometimes I miss having a warm bed and a hot shower. Sometimes I miss feeling safe. But I don't regret learning what I've learned." Jessica wrote a long article about Robert Chen. She titled it, "The Millionaire Who Chose the Streets." The article told Robert's story with respect and compassion. It also included information about homelessness in Seattle and quotes from other homeless people who knew Robert. When the article was published, it caused a huge reaction. Some people were amazed by Robert's story. They thought he was brave for giving up his wealth to learn about suffering. They praised him for donating his money to help other people. But other people were angry. They thought Robert was crazy or attention-seeking. They said he was taking resources away from real homeless people who had no choice. They said his story made light of the serious problem of homelessness. The story was shared thousands of times on social media. Local TV stations picked it up and did their own reports. National news websites wrote about it. Soon, people all over the country were talking about Robert Chen. At the downtown emergency shelter where Robert was volunteering, people started coming by hoping to see him. Some were reporters wanting interviews. Some were curious people who wanted to meet the famous homeless millionaire. Some were homeless advocates who wanted to use his story to raise awareness about homelessness. Robert was uncomfortable with all the attention. He had chosen to live quietly, and now his life was very public. He asked the shelter director if he could volunteer somewhere else away from the cameras and crowds. The community was divided about what Robert's story meant. At a city council meeting about homelessness funding, people argued about whether Robert's case supported or hurt the cause of helping homeless people. This man had choices that other homeless people don't have, said one city council member. We shouldn't use his story to represent the homeless community as a whole. But his story shows that homelessness can happen to anyone, said a homeless advocate. It shows that we need to treat all homeless people with dignity and respect. Store. Owners in the area where Robert had been arrested had mixed feelings. Some felt guilty for complaining about homeless people after learning Robert's story. Others said it didn't matter why someone was homeless. They still had the right to keep their property clear. I feel bad about calling the police on him, said the owner of the clothing store where Robert had been sleeping. If I had known his story, maybe I would have handled it differently. But another business owner disagreed. It doesn't matter if he's rich or poor. Sleeping in doorways is still against the law. We can't run our businesses if people are camping in front of our stores. The police department also faced questions about how they had handled Robert's case. Some people praised Officer Martinez for treating Robert with respect and helping him get counseling services. Others criticized the police for giving special treatment to someone who used to be wealthy. Captain Williams held a press conference to address the criticism. We treated Mr. Chen exactly like we would treat any other first-time trespassing offender, he said. He received the standard sentence for his crime. The fact that he used to have money had nothing to do with how we handled his case. But the controversy continued. Social media was full of debates about Robert's story. Some people started calling him Saint Robert and praising him for giving up his wealth. Others called him Crazy Robert and said his story proved that homeless people were mentally ill. Mental health experts weighed in on the discussion. Some said Robert was clearly suffering from depression and trauma that needed professional treatment. Others said his choice to live simply was a valid response to grief. Even if it was unusual, grief affects everyone differently, said Dr. Sarah Thompson, a psychologist who worked with trauma victims. Some people become workaholic. Some people become reclusive. Mr. Chen chose to radically change his lifestyle. That doesn't necessarily mean he's mentally ill. But Dr. Michael Rodriguez, who worked with homeless individuals, disagreed. 6 months after his arrest, Robert Chen sat in a small coffee shop near the waterfront. Across from him sat Officer Sarah Martinez. They had been meeting like this once a month since his story became public. What had started as a police follow-up had become something like a friendship. How are you handling all the attention? Sarah asked. Robert stirred his coffee slowly. It's getting better. Most people have forgotten about me now. There are always new stories to capture people's interest. But some people still remember, Sarah said. Yes, Robert agreed. I get letters sometimes. People telling me their own stories of loss. People asking for advice. Sometimes people asking for money. Do you answer them? I answer the ones that seem genuine, Robert said. The people who are really struggling and just need someone to listen. I don't answer the ones who just want money. Sarah looked at Robert carefully. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. He was still thin, but not as thin as before. His clothes were cleaner. His hair was shorter and neater. He still looked like someone who didn't have much money, but he no longer looked like someone who was living on the streets. Robert, Sarah said, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you still sleeping outside? Robert smiled a little. Not every night. The shelter where I volunteer lets me stay sometimes. and I've made some friends who let me sleep on their couches occasionally. That's good, Sarah said. I was worried about you during the winter. I was worried about me too, Robert said, honestly. Living outside in the rain and cold is much harder than I thought it would be. I have new respect for people who survive on the streets for years. Sarah had been wondering about something for months. Robert, do you think you'll ever go back to living in a house? Maybe get an apartment? Robert was quiet for a long time. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, especially after talking to Dr. Peterson. Dr. Peterson was the counselor that Sarah had helped Robert connect with. Robert had been seeing him once a week for 4 months. What does Dr. Peterson say? He says that punishing myself won't bring Linda and David back. He says that living in dangerous conditions isn't honoring their memory. He thinks they would want me to take better care of myself. Do you agree with him? Robert looked out the window at the water. Sometimes I do. When I'm cold and hungry and scared, I think about Linda. She always wanted me to be happy and safe. She would be upset if she knew I was living this way. And other times? Other times I feel guilty for even thinking about being comfortable again, like I don't deserve to have nice things when they're gone. Sarah understood. She had learned a lot about grief and trauma from watching Robert's journey. Robert, can I tell you what I think? Please. I think you've learned what you came to learn. You understand suffering now in a way you never did before. You understand what homeless people go through. You understand what it means to have no choices and no safety net. You've become a different person than you were 2 years ago. You think so? I know so, Sarah said. The Robert Chen who got arrested 6 months ago was angry and bitter. He had given up on life. But the Robert Chen sitting here now still cares. About other people. He's volunteering at shelters, he's helping other homeless people. He's working with counselors, he's trying to figure out how to live again. Robert thought about this. I do feel different. Not completely better, but different. How? I used to think that suffering was the only honest way to live after losing Linda and David. But now I think maybe helping other people who are suffering is more honest. Maybe more useful too. Sarah smiled. That sounds like progress to me. There's something I haven't told you, Robert said. What's that? I've been thinking about starting a nonprofit organization, something to help homeless people in practical ways. Sarah was interested. What kind of help? I want to create a program that helps homeless people transition back into housing and jobs, not just giving them money, but teaching them skills and helping them navigate all the systems they need to understand. Housing applications, job interviews, managing money, dealing with mental health issues. That sounds like a great idea, Sarah said. You have a unique perspective on what homeless people really need. I've been working with some other volunteers at the shelter to plan it, Robert said. We want to call it Second Chances. The idea is that everyone deserves a second chance at life no matter what has happened to them. Would you run this organization? Robert nodded. I think I would. It would give me a purpose beyond just surviving day to day, and it would let me use what I've learned from living on the streets. What about housing for yourself? Sarah asked. If I'm going to run a nonprofit, I'll need an address and a phone and email. I can't do that while living on the streets, so I've been looking at small apartments, nothing fancy but somewhere clean and safe. Sarah felt happy for Robert. That's wonderful news. I'm scared, though, Robert admitted. Scared of what? Scared that if I start living comfortably again, I'll forget what I've learned. Scared that I'll become disconnected from the people I want to help. Sarah understood his concern. Robert, do you think a doctor who treats cancer patients needs to have cancer himself to be effective? No, of course not. Do you think a teacher needs to be unable to read in order to understand students who struggle with reading? No. Then why do you think you need to be homeless in order to help homeless people effectively? Robert looked surprised. He had never thought about it that way. You can remember what it felt like to be homeless without continuing to be homeless, Sarah continued. In fact, you might be able to help people better if you're not worried about your own survival every day. Robert smiled. Dr. Peterson said something similar. He said that taking care of myself would give me more energy to take care of other people. He's right, Sarah said. Over the next few months, Robert's life changed dramatically. With help from Dr. Peterson and some of the contacts he had made through his volunteer work, Robert found a small one-bedroom apartment near downtown. It was simple and inexpensive, but it was clean and safe. Robert also began the process of starting his nonprofit organization. He used some of the money he had kept in his bank account to pay for legal fees and initial expenses. Several other volunteers from the shelter joined him as board members. The most surprising development was that Robert began speaking at conferences and meetings about homelessness. At first, he was very nervous about public speaking, but he discovered that people were interested in hearing his perspective as someone who had experienced both wealth and homelessness. When I was rich, Robert would tell audiences, I thought I understood poverty. I gave money to charities and felt good about helping people. But I didn't really understand what it meant to have no choices. I didn't understand the daily stress of not knowing where you'll sleep or when you'll eat. I didn't understand how it feels to be invisible to most of society. Robert's speeches were powerful because he spoke from personal experience. He could describe exactly what it felt like to be moved along by police, to be turned away from full shelters, to be treated like a criminal just for existing. But Robert always made sure to emphasize that his story was unusual. I chose to be homeless, he would say. Most homeless people don't have that choice. I always knew I could access my bank account if I had a real emergency. Most homeless people don't have that safety net. My experience taught me a lot, but it's important to remember that it's different from the experience of people who become homeless through job loss, mental illness, addiction, or family crisis. Officer Martinez continued to stay in touch with Robert. His transformation had affected her too. She had started volunteering at homeless shelters on her days off. She had also changed how she approached homeless people in her police work. Used to see homeless people as problems to be solved, Sarah told Robert during one of their monthly coffee meetings. Now I see them as people with stories. It doesn't always change what I have to do as a police officer, but it changes how I do it. What do you mean? I mean, I take more time to listen. I try to connect people with services instead of just arresting them. I treat them with more respect and dignity. Has it made a difference? I think so, Sarah said. Other officers have noticed the change too. Some of them have started asking me for advice about how to handle situations with homeless people. Robert was pleased to hear this. That's exactly the kind of change I was hoping for when I agreed to speak publicly about my story. You've influenced more than just police officers, Sarah said. I've heard from social workers and city officials who say your story has changed how they think about homelessness policy. This was true. Robert's story had contributed to several changes in how Seattle dealt with homelessness. The city had increased funding for mental health services. They had created more transitional housing programs. They had trained police officers and social workers to be more sensitive when dealing with homeless individuals. But perhaps the most important change was in public attitudes. While some people were still hostile to homeless individuals, many others had been influenced by Robert's story to see homeless people as complex human beings rather than just problems to be solved. Robert's nonprofit organization, Second Chances, officially opened 1 year after his arrest.